Tony Kawana wasn't born into the mob. He was born into a two-room apartment above Angelo's Pizzeria in Red Hook in the summer of 1934 during a blackout. His ma swore he came out holding a pepperoni stick. His dad, Vito Palladino Sr., was a dock worker with a gambling problem and a busted hip. His mother made sauce for 3 generations of neighborhood wise guys without ever knowing or admitting who she was really feeding. By age 11, Tony was running numbers for the local bookie, a wiry little guy named Flippo the Fingers Maglione. By 14, Tony was slapping around kids who owed on punch cards. He wasn't big, but he had eyes that didn't blink and a mouth that didn't shut up unless it was chewing. What separated Tony from the other street kids wasn't muscle, it was loyalty. When a local tough, Eddie Nuzzo, stole from Flippo's Dropbox, Tony didn't tell. He just followed Eddie into the alley behind the pool hall and jammed a broken mop handle through his thigh. Didn't kill him, just made sure he limped the rest of his life. That got the attention of Sal, the butcher Bianchi, a local capo with ties to the Profaci crew. Sal took Tony under his wing, not because he liked the kid, but because Tony never asked questions, never bragged, never squealed. By the 1950s, Tony was moving up, running Shylock operations out of a dry cleaner on Atlantic Avenue, taking collection runs, busting heads. Every once in a while, someone disappeared after crossing the wrong guy, and Tony always had an airtight alibi. He never got made. Too volatile, too flashy. But he was useful, and in this business, useful was better than respected. The story really begins the day he flew to Miami. When he walked into that hotel suite with Santo Trafficante and Carlos Marcello, the world changed. But back in Brooklyn, Tony was still just a guy with red sauce on his shirt and blood on his hands. By the mid-1950s, Red Hook was a battlefield wrapped in cobblestones and cigarette smoke. The docks were hot with Union cash, the jukeboxes were rigged, and every corner had its own racket. Tony Pizza Kawana found his niche in the numbers game. Illegal lottery tickets sold to grandmas with rosary beads and guys named Benny who bet on horse dreams. He worked under Vinny 2 times Romano, a bookie who talked fast and died faster. Vinny ran numbers from a fake tailor shop on Columbia Street, but everyone knew the only thing getting stitched was the books. Tony became his collector, enforcer, and part-time driver. That's where he got the nickname. One night, Vinny sent Tony to settle a debt with a guy in Chinatown who ran a mahjong parlor that doubled as a heroin spot. Tony, always hungry, stopped on the way for a slice. When he showed up late, the guy laughed, said something in Cantonese, and pulled a blade. Tony never flinched. He took 1 step forward and shoved the burning hot pizza slice right into the guy's face, cheese first. Blinded, the guy swung wildly. Tony ducked, took the blade, and stabbed him in the shoulder with his own weapon. When Vinny heard about it, he said, "This kid, he settles scores with mozzarella. Call him Tony Pizza." The name stuck. Tony liked it, said it gave him a brand. He started carrying business cards that read, "Tony Pizza, Dispute Resolution, Cash Only." By the end of '56, Tony was pulling in serious side cash. He ran a crew of 3 knuckleheads, Fat Jerry, Little Paulie, and a mute named Nicky No Talks, collecting debts and clearing out gamblers who forgot the rules. One time, he allegedly dropped a guy off the Verrazzano in a pizza box just to make a point. Nobody ever found the body, but the anchovy smell lingered for days. Despite his talent for violence, Tony never made it official. Sal, the butcher, liked him, but the big bosses said no. He was too flashy, carried himself like a made guy without the button. Worse, he was unpredictable. He talked to outsiders, smiled too much, and drank wine with ice in it. That didn't fly with old-school Cosa Nostra. Still, Tony had value, especially to the guys who operated in shadows darker than the mob. One of those guys was the man in the gray suit, a DC ghost with no name, no records, and an offer that would take Tony from Brooklyn to a Texas motorcade. Dallas, Texas, November 22nd, 1963. The air was dry, the sun was bright, and Tony Pizza Caruana was sweating bullets before he even held one. He had arrived 3 days earlier under the name Dominic Marino, checking into a dingy boarding house on Commerce Street. His bags were light, just a change of clothes, cash in rubber bands, and a rifle broken down into 3 parts and wrapped in butcher paper. He spent the 20th and 21st scouting. Not the book depository, that was Oswald's gig. Tony's post was the Daltex building, just behind and slightly to the right of the motorcade route. A better angle, less crowded, fewer questions. This was the plan he'd been handed, straight from Traficante's guy in Havana. Oswald is the patsy. You're the insurance. If Oswald flinched, missed, or lost his nerve, Tony was the safety net. His orders were simple. Don't get caught. Don't get seen. Get it done. On the morning of the 22nd, Tony had coffee at a diner on Elm Street, ate 2 eggs, toast, and a side of grits he didn't ask for. He tipped the waitress $5, almost generous. He entered the Daltex building at 9:42 a.m., wearing a janitor's uniform and carrying a mop bucket. It wasn't full of water. It held his gear, a scoped Carcano rifle, wiped clean and greased for quick assembly. He made his way to the 7th floor, quiet, unused, perfect. He set up behind a stack of dusty office equipment, cracked a window, and waited. Heartbeat steady, palms dry, no nerves. He wasn't the type. 12:29 p.m. The motorcade turned the corner. Tony lined up his shot. Oswald was supposed to go first. 12:30 p.m. Pop. The first shot rang out. Crowd screamed. Birds scattered. Tony looked down his scope. No hit. He saw Kennedy clutch his throat, then heard a second shot. Too slow. Then he squeezed his trigger. Pop. From his angle, it was a clean headshot. The president's skull snapped back. Brains and blood painted the convertible. Jackie lunged. Secret Service agents panicked, screaming everywhere. Tony disassembled the rifle in under 90 seconds. Tossed the barrel and stock into a furnace chute he'd scoped out days prior. Slipped the bolt into a dumpster behind the building. He exited out the back wearing a pair of horn-rimmed glasses and a new shirt. He walked 4 blocks south, got into a car with Florida plates, and didn't look back. By the time the feds picked up Oswald, Tony was already on a plane to Mexico City. From there, he vanished into Havana, where Traficante met him personally with a suitcase of cash and a promise. You're done, kid. You're history now. But Tony wasn't done. He'd just become the most dangerous kind of man, the kind history forgets. On purpose. Tony Pizza touched down in Havana under the cover of a tropical thunderstorm. The name on his passport read Enzo Moretti, and the Cuban immigration officer didn't ask questions. He just looked at the envelope Tony slid across the desk and stamped the entry page without a word. Waiting outside was Alonso Garcia, Traficante's man in Havana. Former Batista loyalist, current casino ghost. He spoke perfect English, carried a revolver he never used, and drove a rusted Ford that somehow still ran. You'll be staying at the Capri, Alonso said. Traficante says keep your head down. No women, no heat. You're a shadow. Tony nodded and lit a cigarette. Does the room come with a minibar? The Capri was one of the last American playgrounds still breathing in Castro's Cuba. The mob used to run it all: casinos, clubs, drugs, and dames. Then the revolution came and turned blackjack tables into interrogation rooms. But for Tony, Havana was safer than Miami, quieter than Brooklyn, and far enough from Dealey Plaza to feel like a dream. He stayed on the 11th floor, drank rum with Cuban TV on low volume, kept a loaded pistol in the Bible drawer. Every night he stood on the balcony, looked out at the harbor, and waited for a bullet that never came. But Havana wasn't safe. Not really. One night, Alonzo showed up at Tony's door with a bottle and a look in his eyes that spelled trouble. "They're asking questions in New Orleans," Alonzo said. "The FBI's poking Marcello's people. Oswald's dead, Ruby's in jail, and now Traficante's nervous." "Nervous," Tony scoffed. "I did what they asked." "Exactly," Alonzo said. "You did it too well." Tony knew what that meant. There was no retirement plan for guys who killed presidents, no pension for ghosts. The only thing more dangerous than knowing secrets was living long enough to repeat them. For 3 months, Tony stayed locked down. But then word came from Traficante himself, through a burner phone line at a bar in Miramar. "You've got one chance," the voice said. "Take it or disappear forever." It wasn't a threat. It was a choice. Traficante offered him a ticket to Caracas, a new name and a final payout. Or he could stay in Havana, and likely never leave. Tony took the ticket. Before he left, Alonzo gave him a parting gift, a small wooden box with a gold coin inside, stamped with the head of a Roman emperor. "What's this?" Tony asked. "A reminder," Alonzo said. "Even Caesar got whacked." Tony nodded, pocketed the coin, and disappeared into the Venezuelan heat. He'd never be seen in the United States again. But his shadow? That would linger in every whispered theory, every redacted page, and every cold trail that started with a single shot in Dallas and ended with a man named Pizza vanishing into smoke. Caracas, Venezuela, 1964. Officially, Enzo Moretti was a Sicilian expat who ran a modest pizzeria in the Sabana Grande district. Unofficially, he was a fugitive from the most infamous political hit in American history, hidden in plain sight, flipping dough with one eye on the door. Tony Pizza didn't trust anyone. Not the neighbors, not the police, not even the kid who swept the floors. He lived above the restaurant, carried a .38 under the counter, and burned every letter he received, especially the ones from New York, postmarked with no return address. The place was called La Mano Rosa. It was clean, cheap, and served the only pepperoni in the city. Customers loved the food, but thought the owner was strange. He rarely spoke, never smiled, closed early, never opened on the 22nd of any month. Word traveled, as it always does. A CIA asset flagged the name. A field report from Station Caracas mentioned a pizzeria owner with mob tattoos and a New York accent. But the lead went nowhere. Too many false names, too many buried files. Meanwhile, Tony had turned his paranoia into routine. He walked a different route home every night, switched phones monthly, even wore different shoes on alternate days in case someone tried to track his gait. But what haunted him wasn't the FBI or the mob. It was what he'd done and who he'd done it for. One night in '67, a man came into the shop, tall, thin, American suit but no tie. He didn't order. Just sat at a corner table and waited until the place cleared out. "You don't remember me," the man said, "but I was in Miami. Fontainebleau, November '62. Same room. You served the drinks." Tony froze. The man slid a folded envelope across the table. Inside, a photo of Jack Ruby, dead, a clipping of Oswald's murder, and a card with 3 letters, OSS. The man said nothing else, just finished his espresso and left. Tony closed the shop for a week. He started drinking heavier, taking late-night walks with a loaded pistol in his waistband. He grew a beard, stopped going to Mass, and one day he took every photo in his apartment, stuffed them into a metal tin, and buried them under the pizza oven. In time, the whispers returned. Some said Tony fled to Brazil. Others swore he died of a heart attack during a blackout. A few claimed they saw him in a monastery near Bogotá, living under the name Brother Antonio. But one thing's certain. After 1971, Tony Pizza vanished, this time for good. No body, no funeral, just a rumor, a pizzeria that became a hair salon, and a story too dangerous to tell in full. Until now. The CIA, the Cosa Nostra, and the man with no face. There are files that don't exist, rooms that were never built, men who were never born, but moved governments like chess pieces. Tony Pizza knew one of those men. He didn't have a name, just a moniker whispered by traffickers, spooks, and mobsters alike. The man with no face. They first crossed paths in 1960, though Tony didn't realize it until years later. It was during a courier run to Miami. Tony had to deliver a suitcase to a Cuban named Reynaldo, middleman for Traficante. When he arrived, a pale man in tortoiseshell glasses was already there, sipping black coffee and reading the Herald Tribune upside down. He didn't say a word, just nodded once and left. 3 years later, after Dallas, after Havana, after Caracas, Tony saw the same man again. This time in a Venezuelan police station, pinned to a corkboard among mugshots labeled CIA Suspected Assets. His face was circled in red, with one word scribbled beside it: Goliath. According to ex-CIA technician Philip Toscano, who later testified to Congress in a closed-door session in 1975, Goliath was the agency's executive denial mechanism, a shadow handler. He didn't order hits. He curated them. He didn't tell men what to do. He simply arranged for them to be in the wrong place at the exact right time. Toscano confirmed what Tony suspected. The JFK hit wasn't just mob retaliation. It was a collaboration. Marcello wanted Kennedy gone. So did Giancana. But so did the CIA. After the Bay of Pigs, the boys in Langley lost their golden boy. Jack was cutting deals, making noise. They needed him out, without fingerprints. Tony was the tool, a throwaway, a wise guy with no family ties, no paper trail, no protection. He was chosen because he was expendable, and because he was desperate to matter. In the late 60s, a memo marked Eyes Only, Phoenix Protocol, was circulated among select Langley officers. It listed known operatives connected to unauthorized domestic elimination efforts. Tony's name was on it. Not as a suspect, not as a witness, but as a test case. By 1971, all contact with Tony ceased. Even Traficante, who once called him the insurance policy, stopped taking inquiries. The CIA denied he existed. The mob said he was dead. But in Langley, one line in a 1973 file suggested otherwise. Asset Pizza neutralized under Goliath authorization. Caracas confirmed. Closure indefinite. Some interpret that to mean Tony was killed. Others believe it was a cover. He was placed into deep witness protection, turned informant, or recruited to train wet operatives in black sites from Argentina to Angola. But one thing's certain. The man who pulled the trigger in Dallas wasn't acting alone. He was part of something far bigger than himself, an alliance of convenience between the American intelligence machine and organized crime. And at the heart of it, a guy from Red Hook who just wanted to be somebody. If Tony Pizza died, no one saw it. There was no body, no autopsy, no grave. But in 1982, a faded obituary appeared in a Caracas newspaper. It read, Enzo Moretti, restaurateur, age 48, passed quietly in his sleep, survived by no one, cremated by municipal order. There was no photo, no family, no mention of his past, just a ghost fading into ash. But by then, Tony Pizza was already a whispered legend. In Miami, mobsters at Versailles Cafe swore he faked his death and moved to Portugal. In New Orleans, Marcello's old crew claimed he'd flipped, working for Langley in exchange for immunity. And in Vegas, a pit boss once told a reporter that Tony was spotted at the Tropicana in '85, missing 2 fingers and going by the name Father Antonio. Then, in 1991, a break. A classified file was leaked during a botched FOIA request to the House Assassinations Committee. In it was a redacted CIA cable titled Subject Pizza Termination Protocol, Goliath Final. It read in part, Target neutralized via secondary method, burned contact channels, subject showed signs of psychological decay, no loose ends. But here's the strange part. 3 months later, a CIA employee named Dale Winthrop fell to his death. He was the last person to access the pizza file. Coincidence? Maybe. In the mob world, they say dead men don't talk. But Tony Pizza left breadcrumbs, just enough to haunt both the mob and the government for decades. In 2003, a retired NYPD detective cleaning out an evidence locker found a rusted .38 with a tag reading Unknown Confiscated Caracas 74. Inside the handle was a folded note, written in grease pencil. Tell Sal I was never the patsy. I was the plan. TP. The gun is now missing. So was the note 2 weeks later. Some say Tony Pizza got exactly what he wanted, a legacy buried under conspiracy, fear, and plausible deniability. Others say he was erased by the same forces that used him, discarded like a napkin after a messy meal. But if you ask the old-timers in Brooklyn, guys with limp walks and cloudy eyes, they'll tell you, Tony, he ain't dead. He's just hiding in plain sight. Probably owns a pizza shop in Jersey. Keeps a picture of JFK in the freezer, just to keep it cold. In late October 1963, Anthony Caruana, known as Tony Pizza, was seen entering the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach, Florida. He met with mob figures Santo Trafficante Jr., Carlos Marcello, and Sam Giancana, all resentful of Robert Kennedy's crackdown on organized crime. An informant claimed Tony was approached as a backup shooter for the JFK assassination, should Lee Harvey Oswald fail. He was allegedly flown into Dallas under the name Frank Rizzo, a false identity used in prior operations. On November 18, 1963, Tony checked into the Adolphus Hotel in Dallas under the alias, with no luggage and paid in cash. On November 21st, he was seen near Dealey Plaza, carrying a duffel bag with a modified Carcano rifle. On November 22nd at 12:00 p.m., a witness saw a man fitting Tony's description entering the Daltex building. Security logs for that hour are missing. At 12:30 p.m., President Kennedy was shot and killed, with 3 shots heard. At 12:35 p.m., Tony exited the Daltex building in a gray suit and sunglasses, disappearing into a laundry truck traced to a Chicago plate, later found abandoned in Oak Cliff. A CIA memo noted chatter from Havana about the Italian finished it. After the assassination, Tony Pizza vanished. His associates denied knowing him or turned up dead within 2 years. FBI files suggest he may have been relocated under a fake death through a CIA asset program in Latin America. No official connection has been proven between Tony Pizza and the JFK assassination. The Warren Commission never subpoenaed him. His name appears in redacted footnotes and whispered rumors, fueling conspiracy theories.